Also, we now know what's going to take place in 2023, which is exciting. F1 confirmed that we've got 24 races on the calendar, and they also confirmed that we'll see 6 sprint races. I've seen some people applaud that decision. I've seen some people absolutely dog that decision to have 6 sprint races on the calendar. Where did the two of you fall based on the announcement of where you're going to be all next season?
Well, I think if you've got 24 races, having 6 as sprint races, I think personally is okay, because I look at some of the Friday practice sessions we have, especially when we get to this stage of the season and it's all been wrapped up, or it's kind of obvious which way it's going to go. And doing 2 practice sessions on a Friday, another one on Saturday morning, and then you get to qualifying, it seems like it takes a long time for the weekend to get going. Now, of course, under the sprint format, you have a normal qualifying session on Friday evening, kind of Friday afternoon, Friday evening. Then you have the sprint race on Saturday. And I think it just, there is just more going on in a race weekend. Is it the best possible way to spend those sessions? Is there a better way to make it more exciting? Possibly. Do I think sprint races in and of themselves, just shortening a Grand Prix distance using the same tyres, is the best way to have exciting wheel-to-wheel racing? No, it's not. I think there's better ways you can do it. I think you could tailor the tyres to working for a sprint race, things like that. But F1 is it's not been afraid to make changes, to test things out. And I don't remember any of the sprint races since they've come in really being totally awful over the whole weekend. There's always been something in that weekend that's exciting. Whereas 3 practice sessions, I like doing the analysis. I like going into the data. I like talking to drivers and team members about what the tires are doing. But even for me, it's a lot of just going around in circles without any competitive element. And I think that's what's important with sprint races. So I think 6 of 24 is the right number. More than that, maybe not. But 6 of 24 is the right amount, I think.
Just gonna say, I don't know if the bar should be totally awful. Like, it's not totally awful.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not the most ringing endorsement I've ever heard of something. It wasn't completely awful. I didn't hate it. I think I'm a bit split on the sprint races.
Just to go on this, some people out there online will lead you to believe they were totally awful. So that's why I'm thinking it's not as bad as a lot of people make out. There were elements in all of those weekends which were exciting. Sorry, Nate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I'm quite split on it, because I think I like the fact, like Lawrence said, that changing things up in such a long season, I think is key. I like the fact you add a bit more jeopardy to a weekend. If you go for an overtake during a sprint race, you might completely make a mistake of that, and you suddenly find out I've actually dropped places down the order from where I qualified. I just think, and the one that sticks out is Lewis in Brazil, is that fight through the field in 2021. But I don't think you get that often. That happened because he had engine penalties and he started at the back. Usually what we've seen is sprint races kind of settle down into their own, into everyone's in their positions within a handful of laps. Sometimes you get a bit of a fight maybe if someone's done something different with tyres. But I don't know. I think the format needs to change. And the frustrating thing for me is that the reason sprint races came in is because teams like Mercedes blocked the reverse grid idea that was being floated around as well. And I think when you have a season as long as 24 races, I think there should be different formats. Maybe 6 seems like it could be too much of a good thing. I liked 3 because it's like, oh, it's a sprint race this weekend. You worry when you get 6 of them, does it become, oh, it's another sprint race? I think maybe people already do that when there's 3 of them. So if you double it suddenly, but if you had a race where, I don't know, let's say, everyone talks about Monaco, don't they? But I've always thought, like, Monaco, you should give points out for qualifying and then have the race as well. Really play up the fact that Monaco's qualifying session is probably the hardest qualifying session of the year. And then you go into it and it has even more meaning on that Saturday. It's like, wow, if someone does mess up in practice and they destroy their car, then they've potentially cost themselves points as well. So I think F1 shouldn't just narrow itself to being like, okay, it's sprint races or it's the normal format. They should try different things out. Obviously, there's a risk then you dilute the product, but qualifying should always be key, and the race should be. So I don't know, if you qualify, then you have a reverse grid sprint race based on championship order on Saturday, but then the Grand Prix itself on Sunday is still set by qualifying. I'd quite like that, because you'd get something fun in the weekend, something that was meaningful for the championship. You wouldn't have ruined a lot of purists say, oh, you ruin the qualifying. The guy who gets pole in qualifying doesn't necessarily start from first position. There was all that kind of back and forth of like, well, who gets pole position now in the record books? Is it the guy that gets the fastest qualifying time, or is it the guy who wins the sprint race? Overall, I'm happy to see how it plays out. But I'm just worried that we'll just get and F1 seem determined every time we have a sprint race to tell everyone how great it was. They're like, oh, the metrics we've got were that this was the best thing that's ever happened, and I'm just like, if it was great, you wouldn't need to constantly be telling us how great something was. It would be naturally people would be like, it was really fun. And I think it's fair to say the sprint race has been pretty divisive. It's split people. Like Lawrence said, it's very like Marmite, as we say in the UK. People love it, but they absolutely hate it. I don't think there's really much middle ground there. So I don't know. I think Formula One has to be a bit more honest about the type of race and the fact that maybe it does need a bit of changing. But ultimately, yeah, if we'd had 24, I can't even do the maths quickly, but 24 times 3 practice sessions, when even Lawrence is saying he gets bored of them, the format had to change. So I agree with that. But yeah, I'm kind of, I can't get excited about 6 sprint races. So sorry to anyone listening who's super pumped for that. But I mean, yeah, it's a difficult one because I feel like by saying I'm not excited,
he's even struggling right now.
Yeah, because I can totally like I'm the first one to be like Formula One needs to freshen things up and it needs to keep things fresh because of how big the calendar is. So I feel like I'm arguing against my own position on other things, but I don't know. There's just something deep inside me that just thinks it's maybe not as great as F1's made it out to be. But hey, happy to be proven wrong. If there's 6 great sprint races next year, then it's worked, if it makes the racing a lot better. So we'll see how it plays out next year. It'll be interesting to see which venues they pick as well, because that's been a big debate. And I think that's key as well. If Formula One can do the right research and say a sprint race here would make the rest of the weekend better, then maybe that is, vindication for the decision.
I think one of the other things is 24 races in a year. That is a huge amount. And this is a problem, is that when you've got a championship like this one where it can, it can be decided so early, then really, do you want to sit through 24 of these races? That is too much of a good thing as far as I'm concerned. So, when I look at the calendar, it's not the proportion of sprints, it's the length of the calendar as a whole. And some of the races on there perhaps not being the most exciting places to go racing.
Well, it's 30 races, technically, if you add the sprints in as well. So that's where, if you add the two together, suddenly you're asking people to watch 30 race events of some sort. So it suddenly becomes a very big number.
What's the sense you get from the drivers? Are they on board with this many races in a calendar year?
I think they're sometimes a bit careful about it, what they say, because very much F1, does tell them to don't say bad things about the sprint race, don't slag off new races coming onto the calendar. But I think there's also an eye on not so much the drivers, because they do live a life of relative luxury, going in private jets and stuff like that. But some of the mechanics who are having to go from race to race to race and are really spending a huge amount of time away from home, but also just spending a huge amount of time, working on race cars. And it's a tough life out there for them. A lot of time in places like Singapore, you don't always get air-conditioned garages. There's, a lot of hard work that really has to go into it way before the weekend starts, not just seeing the cars go out on Sunday. So I think, F1 has to look at itself, and it's trying to cut costs on one end, but at the other end, it's trying to have more and more races. And the two, I'm not sure, are going to work together long term and a perfect solution. So I think the drivers themselves, they actually love racing. They like the idea of going racing a lot. But I think some of the other people in the sport, everyone has to kind of look and try and protect and make sure things don't get too difficult and too just exhausting, really, both mentally and physically for a lot of the people involved.
Yeah, the drivers are the one kind of aspect of this I don't really feel too much sympathy for, because these are super fit young men. They're all they can all cope with it. I mean, some of them do struggle with some of the jet lag at some of the events, but I think, like Lawrence said, I think the human cost on people working in it. I saw a lot of people tweet when the calendar came out. It wouldn't be surprising, for team bosses to start hearing from people that currently work on their race team, hey, can I get a factory job next year? So I'm based back at base, because I think that's the biggest thing, the strain it puts on people's kind of social lives, personal lives and stuff. If people have families as well. I think I worked out that if you did every race next year and you did the tests as well, if you factor in all the traveling and stuff like that, you'll be on the road to close to half the year. You obviously get August off and you get the off season. It's a massive amount of time to be sat on planes and all those things. So, and there's a lot of people that do literally every single second of every single race. So you do see people kind of say, well, it's it's a dream job, but obviously it comes with for a lot of the mechanics, it comes with huge sacrifices on that side. So I'm interested to see the the longevity of it. And I think the complaints next year, it'll be interesting to listen to how loud they are and if F1 entertains them. If F1 has those discussions with teams, because I think the problem now is there's so much money being thrown at F1 from race events. I don't think they're going to start scaling it back. I think kind of the horse has bolted on this. So, the idea that suddenly turn around and be like, right, next year we'll do 22 races again. And, these 2 races will no longer pay us the money. It's like, well, that's not really going to happen. So I don't know. It's a tricky one. And if Max is winning the championship by Singapore every year, then it's even worse. And that becomes another discussion point of the longer the season, the more dead rubbers you get if somebody dominates. I think that's terrible for Formula One. The great thing with American sports is it finishes on the final day. So the final match or the final play of the season usually, comes down the team that wins the final game wins the championship. Don't think that should be the case in Formula One because you'd have to kind of make it artificial. But as a season goes, we saw it last season, didn't we? How entertaining that was. But I think that's going to be more, like rarer and rarer as we go along, because to be close over 24 races versus being super close over 17 or 16, I think it's a lot more difficult. So we'll see how that affects it going forward. But yeah, agreed with Lawrence. It's way too many.
I would just like to say, as an American who have watched leagues kind of dig their heels in and stay the same, and as fans, we have asked and asked and asked to see something different in terms of the process and changes made to the way the league does things. I do think it's worth applauding Stefano Domenicali and the fact that they are willing to make changes or try different things. I don't necessarily feel like this is a perfect solution here with 24 and 6, but I do appreciate the fact that F1 listens and says, okay, we'll try to make this a little bit more entertaining or interesting. And if it doesn't work, we'll move on.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.